Hello there, my name is Ksenia Smirnova, and now we will unveil the top news of recent days. Russia is ready to risk its aircraft to maintain a tactical advantage in the Avdiivka direction. The Institute for the Study of War reports this. In total, since February 17, Ukrainian troops have destroyed 14 aircraft, which is almost one aircraft per day. Among the damaged targets is the radar vessel A-50. This is the second aircraft of this model shot down over the Sea of Azov over the winter. Now, the Russians do not use such aircraft in this part of the battlefield because there are only 7 of them left and their condition is unknown.
This week alone we managed to shoot down 7 Russian military aircraft, the very ones that drop these bombs and kill. Since the beginning of February, Russia has lost 15 military aircraft. This is the proper dynamics of their losses. And the more capabilities we have to shoot down Russian aircraft, the farther we destroy Russian logistics in our occupied territory, the more Ukrainian lives will be saved. This war must become hopeless for Russia, for the terrorists, and they must feel to the fullest extent possible that there is a force that destroys those who want to destroy life.
The Air Force of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reported that no Russian military aircraft have been observed in the east since the evening of March the 2nd. At the same time, the latest losses of Russian aviation within 2 weeks prompted the invaders to temporarily reduce aviation activity throughout Ukraine. However, the increase in Russian aviation losses has not yet prompted Russian troops to significantly reduce tactical aviation activity. The Institute of Study War estimates that in the final days of the capture of Avdiivka, Russian forces temporarily established a limited and local air advantage. Institute for Study of War estimates that the loss of aircraft and several highly trained pilots over the past 2 weeks is not a major loss for the Russian military, given the fact that Russia likely has about 300 Sukhoi fighters. Therefore, Russia will continue to lose its aircraft and their soldiers, whom they do not count. They were counted by British intelligence. Russian losses in February became the highest since the beginning of the war. According to Britain's estimate, in February 2024, Russia lost an average of 983 fighters every day. The increase in the average daily indicator almost certainly reflects Russia's readiness for massive and protracted hostilities, British intelligence said. The British military indicates that at such a high cost, Russia managed to increase pressure on the front. According to Great Britain's assessment, Russia's losses now exceed 355,000 people killed, according to the estimates of the Ukrainian General Staff. There are more than 410,000 of them. Saturday and Sunday in the city of Karabulak in Russian-occupied Ingushetia passed to the sounds of a military confrontation. The Kremlin calls the fighters for the independence of Ingushetia terrorists, but in reality, this is not the case. After all, it is the regime in Kremlin that is terrorist, and any of their statements are like Al-Qaeda statements that there are terrorists in Washington or in London. But it's the Kremlin managers who are terrorists. And now we are talking not only about Ukraine. Do you know how the battles took place in Karabulak? They tried to destroy 6 men who barricaded themselves in one of the apartments with flamethrowers. Despite the fact that there are civilians nearby, the Russian security forces had a task to kill someone. If someone other than targets comes under fire, that's their question. Let the civilians worry about it. Do you know what information the official Kremlin media spread after the fighting ended? I will quote: "The militants were destroyed, now their names are being revealed." That's it. First, we will destroy it, then we will find out who it was. And even later, we will figure out why it was important to kill them. As in Ukraine, rockets are launched first, and then the building where the rockets landed will be called the location of the armed forces of Ukraine, or even better, NATO mercenaries. We have already seen this many times, for example, in Konstantinivka, Kiev, or Kharkiv. And if a rocket hit a residential building, as on Saturday in Odessa, then they will be completely silent. But for 10 years, they have been talking and talking about the poor man with weapons who died in 2014. The head of the Republic of Ingushetia, subordinate to the Kremlin, Mahmoud Ali Kalimatov, called on residents not to panic and remain calm and to trust only official information. This is the one that talks about biolaboratories, thousands of destroyed Ukrainian planes and air defense systems. True, they are so destroyed that, as I already said, 14 Russian planes in 2 weeks. And once again, people who are fighting with weapons in their hands against Putin's regime on their lands are not militants and even more so-called terrorists, but fighters of national liberation movements.
Since the occupation of our motherland for more than 200 years, the war of the Ingush people for their freedom has not stopped for a day. We, the highest of the traditions of our Abrek Mujahid ancestors, defend our ideals and do not recognize the leadership of the Russian Empire or Rus, regardless of its flag. Our enemies and legitimate military targets are the so-called Russian security forces. We are the Mujahideen. We do not fight civilians, but everyone who has put on the shoulder straps of the empire, no matter the FSB, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, or other numerous punitive bodies, is our enemy and a legitimate military target, regardless of their nationality. Statement by the Command of the Ingush Liberation Army.
We Ukrainians know how the Kremlin discredits national movements. We know that what the FSB calls a counter-terrorist operation is actually a war against the national liberation underground. This is no different from the struggle of the NKVD, KGB against the UPA. The Kremlin is also trying to convince that the National Liberation Front has something in common with ISIS, but this is not the case. The Islamic State does not envisage national identities and nation-states, and freedom fighters are striving for exactly that. If people call themselves Tatars, Bashkirs, Chechens, Ingush, Circassians, Avars, Kumiks, and etc., then they need national freedom, not a new empire instead of the old one. The FSB will continue to use ISIS as a scarecrow for the US and Europe as an argument why the imperialism and decolonization cannot be supported. But as noted in the European Parliament, Russia needs de-imperialization, decolonization and refederalization. According to the Wall Street Journal, during 2022 mobilization, Putin exploited the open Russian borders to allow hundreds of thousands of Russians to flee to Europe, Central Asia and the Caucasus, while simultaneously dispatching intelligence agents among them. The decision came after many Russian diplomats were mentioned to Russia, prompting Putin to augment the ranks of spies. Currently, Russian agents are displaying increasing audacity and ingenuity in suppressing dissent abroad. They may be implicated in the high-profile assassinations of Russian defectors. Since the start of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, a number of businessmen, ex-officials and political figures have also suffered suspicious death on 3 continents. Thus, Russian businessmen were found hanged in London and drowned in Puerto Rico. A united Russia deputy fell from the roof of an Indian hotel, and a 46-year-old deputy minister of science died of an unexplained illness during a fight from Cuba. As we have repeatedly said, Russia will use any events to its advantage. And here I want to tell you again about how Russian propaganda works. You have probably heard more than once that in Ukraine there's religious oppression or oppression of freedom of speech. But in fact, our law enforcement officers fight against Russian influence in this way. After all, Ukraine has been under Russian influence for hundreds of years, and that is why there are thousands of spies and agents here. And it is easiest to keep them exactly as priests. First, in the way it is possible to spread the desired the thesis. Еще раз. First in the way. First, in this way, it is possible to spread the desired thesis among the general population. Secondly, their financing is very difficult to trace because any money can be explained as voluntary donations from parishioners. No one will point out that these voluntary donations came from Moscow and the KGB. And thirdly, the Kremlin acts very intelligently because its Russian church in Ukraine is called Ukrainian. But can there be a Ukrainian church if the patriarch in Moscow is an agent of the Kremlin and prays for the death of Ukrainians and sanctifies the rockets that are fired at our cities? I think this question is rhetorical. And that concludes today's video. So thank you very much for watching us. Stay updated, comment, like, and sure subscribe to our UATV English channel for more news from Ukraine. Your support really matters. Goodbye.